Picture a Viking's typical day, and you probably imagine bloodthirsty warriors charging across frozen battlefields, axes gleaming, ready to pillage the nearest monastery. That mental image? It's completely wrong. Beneath the legend of the raider was a world of farmers, craftsmen, and traders, complex communities bound by tradition, skill, and the harsh demands of survival, with the occasional raid thrown in. And here's the twist. The average Viking spent about as much time raiding as a modern farmer spends at Comic-Con. The typical Viking day began before sunrise, not with sharpening battle axes, but with milking cows. Most Vikings lived on small farms scattered across the harsh landscapes of Norway, Denmark, and Sweden. When the rooster crowed, assuming it hadn't frozen to death overnight, Viking families rose to tend livestock that meant the difference between survival and starvation. Cattle, sheep, goats, and pigs required constant care, especially during the brutal Scandinavian winters when temperatures could drop to -40 degrees Fahrenheit. But here's where it gets interesting. These weren't just simple farmers puttering around with turnips. Every Viking farmer was also a warrior by necessity, because in medieval Scandinavia, your neighbor might decide your cattle look better in his pasture. The famous Viking weaponry. It spent most of its time hanging on walls while its owners mucked out stables and harvested barley. Women dominated the household economy, managing food preservation techniques that would impress modern survivalists. They transformed milk into various cheeses that could last months, fermented fish into a protein-rich paste, and dried meat into jerky that could sustain families through winter. The process required precise timing, mess up the fermentation, and your family might starve before spring. While you were probably taught that Vikings excelled at one thing, violence, the reality is they mastered dozens of complex skills that would challenge modern craftspeople. Every Viking household operated like a miniature factory. Men spent hours each day working iron in their forges, creating everything from farming tools to cooking implements. The process demanded incredible skill, heating iron to precisely 2,100 degrees Fahrenheit, hammering it into shape while red hot, then tempering it through controlled cooling. One mistake could ruin weeks of work and leave a family without crucial implements. Women operated their own sophisticated workshops, transforming raw wool into elaborate textiles through processes that took months to complete. They spun thread on handheld spindles while walking, wove complex patterns on massive looms, and dyed fabrics using techniques that produced colors more vivid than many modern synthetic dyes. The wealthy flaunted silk imported from Constantinople, but most Vikings wore wool textiles that were actually superior to much of what we wear today. Waterproof, warm, and durable enough to last decades. But the most impressive skill, boat building. Vikings constructed vessels that could navigate both open oceans and shallow rivers, using techniques so advanced that modern boat builders still study their methods. The process required mathematical precision in calculating hull curves, sophisticated joinery that created watertight seals without nails, and an understanding of hydrodynamics that wouldn't be formally studied for centuries. Here's something that will completely reshape your understanding of Viking society. They were obsessed with legal proceedings. Vikings spent significant portions of their time engaged in complex legal disputes that would make modern lawyers jealous. Their society operated through intricate hierarchies where everyone knew exactly where they stood, and daily interactions were governed by detailed social protocols that could determine life or death. The Thing system, local assemblies where free men gathered to settle disputes, consumed enormous amounts of time and energy. Vikings would travel for days to attend these gatherings, bringing witnesses, evidence, and elaborate legal arguments. They memorized vast collections of laws, precedents, and procedures that governed everything from property disputes to accusations of sorcery. The process was so sophisticated that it influenced legal systems throughout medieval Europe. Women held far more power than popular culture suggests. Viking women could own property, request divorces, run businesses, and even serve as priestesses. They managed household finances, negotiated marriages, and, in many cases, commanded respect that exceeded their male counterparts. Some women became wealthy merchants, traveling across Europe to trade luxury goods. Social status determined daily routines in ways that would seem bizarre today. Slaves. Yes, Vikings kept slaves, and they performed the most dangerous and unpleasant tasks, while free farmers focused on skilled crafts and land management. The wealthy jarls lived in longhouses that could accommodate 50-plus people, managing complex households that functioned like small corporations. By now, you're probably wondering how they managed all this social complexity while surviving Scandinavian winters. The answer reveals the most brutal aspect of Viking daily life. Viking daily routines shifted so dramatically with the seasons that they essentially lived 4 different lives each year. Summer brought 20-hour days of frantic activity. Vikings worked from dawn until nearly midnight, taking advantage of the brief growing season to cultivate crops, repair buildings, conduct trade, and prepare for the coming winter. They harvested every edible plant, preserved massive quantities of meat and fish, and gathered fuel that would need to last 8 months. The pace was exhausting, but absolutely necessary for survival. Fall meant slaughter season. Vikings killed most of their livestock before winter, preserving the meat through smoking, salting, and freezing. They brewed ale and mead that would provide calories and morale during the dark months. Families gathered in their longhouses, often sharing space with their most valuable animals to keep them alive through the brutal cold. But winter was when Vikings truly earned their reputation for toughness. During the darkest months, daylight lasted only 3 to 4 hours. Temperatures regularly dropped below -20 degrees Fahrenheit, and blizzards could trap families in their homes for weeks. Vikings spent their days huddled around central fires, telling stories, crafting tools, and consuming their carefully preserved food stores. The psychological pressure was intense. Run out of food, and you died. Simple as that. Many Vikings didn't make it through winter. Hypothermia, starvation, and disease killed the old, the young, and the unlucky. Some families faced a horrific choice: share their remaining food and risk everyone starving, or abandon the weakest members to save the rest. Here's the part that will completely flip your understanding of Viking raiding. Most of what we call Viking raids were actually business trips. Vikings developed the most extensive trade networks in medieval Europe, conducting commerce from Greenland to Constantinople. They spent months each year traveling trade routes, negotiating with merchants, and transporting goods across vast distances. A typical trading expedition involved more time haggling over prices than swinging axes. Consider this: Vikings traded amber from the Baltic, furs from Scandinavia, and walrus ivory from Greenland in exchange for silver from Arabia, silk from China, and spices from India. They operated essentially as medieval international businessmen, speaking multiple languages and understanding complex currency exchanges. The famous Viking ships weren't primarily warships. They were cargo vessels designed to carry trade goods. Vikings spent their days loading and unloading merchandise, calculating profits, and maintaining detailed records of transactions. They established permanent trading posts, married into local communities, and built commercial relationships that lasted generations. Even their raids often functioned more like aggressive business negotiations. Vikings would arrive at a settlement, demand payment for protection, and often leave peacefully once they received tribute. Violence was expensive and risky. Much better to collect regular payments than to destroy potential customers. But here's what makes this even more interesting. Viking women often managed these trading operations, controlling family finances, and making decisions about which goods to acquire. Some became wealthy merchants in their own right, commanding trading vessels and negotiating international deals. And even if you survived the trading season, there was still one more challenge waiting back home. Vikings spent hours each day just acquiring and preparing water. They had to break through ice, haul heavy containers, and boil water to make it safe for drinking. Food preparation consumed enormous amounts of time. Grinding grain by hand, churning butter, preparing meals that could feed large households. Even the wealthy spent significant portions of their day on these basic tasks. Personal hygiene required constant effort. Vikings were actually quite clean by medieval standards, but maintaining that cleanliness demanded daily work. They heated water for washing, manufactured soap from animal fats and ash, and maintained their appearance through careful grooming. Men spent time each morning braiding their beards and hair, while women created elaborate hairstyles that indicated their social status. Clothing maintenance was a never-ending chore. Vikings repaired tears, removed stains, and constantly battled the effects of harsh weather on their garments. They waterproofed leather, maintained metal fittings, and replaced worn items through their own craftsmanship. The process required constant attention. Neglect your clothes, and you might freeze to death. Children didn't attend school. They learned by working alongside adults from early ages. Boys helped with farming, crafts, and basic warrior training, while girls mastered the complex skills needed to manage households. By age 12, most Viking children possessed survival skills that would challenge modern adults. You're probably wondering how Vikings managed romance while living in crowded longhouses with minimal privacy. Short answer: they got creative. Young couples found ways to slip notes or carved runes into each other's belongings. Late-night whispered conversations became as daring as any raid. And when love triangles formed in such close quarters, tensions could spiral fast, sometimes into open feuds. But eventually, even the most passionate flings had to face reality, because in Viking society, love almost always led to negotiation. Beneath the surface, marriage followed strict rules. Most unions were arranged between families, with detailed agreements over dowries, inheritance, and social standing. But even in these formal arrangements, genuine affection sometimes flourished or exploded spectacularly. Viking marriages were essentially business contracts, but that didn't prevent emotional bonds from forming. Couples exchanged elaborate gifts, and among the elite, love poetry and drawn-out courtship rituals weren't uncommon. Women could divorce their husbands for reasons like infidelity, neglect, or incompatibility. They retained their property and could remarry freely. A few women, especially those of higher status, even accumulated significant wealth through multiple marriages. Viking households often included extended families, servants, and guests, forming tightly packed communities filled with unspoken rules and daily friction. Longhouses could house 20 to 50 people during harsh winters, and privacy was virtually non-existent. Personal disputes could fester into blood feuds that lasted generations, while romantic entanglements sometimes influenced clan alliances or fueled bitter rivalries. Children were considered part of the father's family, but mothers held significant influence over their upbringing. Women taught their daughters not only domestic skills, but also the legal and social knowledge needed to defend family interests. Some women rose to become trusted advisors, wielding soft power through intelligence, reputation, and strategic marriage ties. So when did these farmer traders actually become the raiders of legend? The answer reveals the calculated, almost corporate nature of Viking warfare that Hollywood completely missed. A typical raid wasn't a berserker frenzy. It was a carefully planned business operation that took months to organize. Viking leaders spent weeks gathering intelligence about target locations, assessing defenses, calculating potential profits, and recruiting experienced warriors. They studied weather patterns, tidal schedules, and seasonal movements of their targets with the precision of modern military strategists. The actual raiding process was surprisingly methodical. Vikings preferred surprise attacks at dawn, when defenders were least prepared. They used their superior ship technology to appear suddenly from rivers or coastlines, overwhelming settlements before organized resistance could form. But here's what most people don't realize. Successful raids aim to minimize casualties on both sides. Dead people can't pay tribute next year. Most Viking raids followed a standard formula. Arrive with overwhelming force, demand payment for leaving peacefully, collect tribute and valuable hostages, then depart with promises to return if payments stopped. The smart Vikings established regular tribute relationships that provided steady income for years. Why destroy a profitable monastery when you could collect annual protection fees instead? But even during active raiding seasons, Vikings spent most of their time on logistics rather than fighting. They maintained weapons and armor, managed supplies for extended expeditions, negotiated with local guides and informants, and coordinated with other raiding groups. A successful raid required the same organizational skills as running a trading expedition, just with higher stakes and sharper consequences for failure. The psychological warfare was often more effective than physical violence. Vikings cultivated their fearsome reputation deliberately, knowing that terrified enemies would surrender quickly rather than fight. They told exaggerated stories about their own brutality, created intimidating ship decorations, and developed battle tactics designed to maximize fear rather than casualties. But what happens when the masters of fear were the ones afraid? Some tribes didn't run, they didn't bow, they fought back, with a brutality that shook even the Vikings. Click on this video to uncover the forgotten tribes that the Norse themselves feared.